She wasn't at the table for the project pitch, she was there for him. The lounge hummed like a living thing, low laughter spilling over martinis, the soft scrape of chairs, a pianist threading silver notes beneath the murmur. Above it all, a chandelier rained warm light, turning glass into tiny suns. Sam Judd sat angled toward the room, the kind of angle that read approachable without becoming needy. He wore a jacket that fit like it had been made for this life, crisp shoulder, effortless collar, and when he smiled across the table at Nina Wade, it softened the whole room. Nina watched him from the corner of her eye, a small private smile anchored by something steadier than amusement. She didn't lean into him. She didn't touch him either, not in the way people who share the public mirror of a relationship do. They were colleagues. The dinner's program read if you squinted. Sam, investor and guest of honor. Nina, head designer and the quiet force behind the collection on every poster in the lobby. To anyone glancing from the periphery, they were a friendly pairing at best. Two professionals making the right kind of optics. That was the point. Nina had learned long ago how to translate affection into a practical, quiet grammar. A hand over a napkin. A joke only he heard. A glance that said, "We're present for the room but not of it." She kept their private life, when they had one, folded and placed in a drawer you couldn't quite open with mere curiosity. Sam had been the one who suggested discretion at first. She'd insisted on it later, not because secrecy made love truer, but because it made work possible. In an industry that could smell scandal where there was none, half-truths were incendiary. "He's charming," a woman at the next table murmured, loud enough that the phrase floated and braided into the music. Glasses tilted, heads turned. Sam's laugh arrived before his answer. It was the practiced laugh of someone who understood attention and how to let it fall where it did the least damage. "That's my job tonight," he said, eyes softening on Nina. "Charm, and maybe pretend I know fashion terms." Nina rolled her shoulders invisibly. She kept a list in her head of things to correct later. Fabric choices, the colorway that would sing only under daylight, and the fact that Sam's idea of maybe needed stricter boundaries. But she also catalogued small, easy things that made her chest unclench. The way he threaded a napkin through a glass stem without looking like he was trying. The way his eyes squinted when he genuinely laughed. He wasn't wearing a conspicuous ring. That had been intentional. Sam and Nina had been married quietly, privately. No church brimstone, no family spectacle, because they had wanted something that could breathe without performance. The secrecy had a practical logic too. Fewer questions at work, fewer headlines, fewer vendors leaning in with inappropriate familiarity. Nina preferred the ring hidden anyway. A plain band beneath her glove and a different life in the public square kept them both sane. But tonight, under the chandeliers, there would be people who loved to guess. She saw the woman before anyone announced her. Claire arrived like a punctuation mark, bold, deliberate, and entirely practiced. Red was her statement, lipstick, dress, the small gleaming knife of an accessory at her throat. She navigated the room like it owed her attention, and in a way it had learned to oblige. When Claire's eyes landed on Sam, her smile sharpened into full intent. That smile was not accidental, it was a tool. She threaded through a constellation of minglers and rose up at their table with performances in tow. A laugh, an easy brush of fingers along the back of a chair, the tilt of a body that said, "I am unafraid." There was a certain speed to her movements, a choreography that said she did this for a living, of getting a laugh, shifting the frame, making a man visible in the precise way a media shot would demand. "You're Sam Judd," she said, arriving at their side with the kind of confidence that slides smoothly into an introduction and makes small talk unnecessary. "I've read your interviews. You make investing sound like sex." It was meant to be a line. It landed like a puck on the table, and the room registered its trajectory. A few heads turned. The pianist's hands hovered over the keys and found a lighter touch, the background buzz thinning into a spotlight. Nina's jaw smoothed. She studied Claire as she would a cut of cloth, precision first, then judgment. Sam's eyebrows lifted in practiced amusement. "Flattery," Sam said, measured and warm. He extended his hand because manners were a kind of structural integrity, and exaggeration, mostly the latter. Claire's fingers brushed his in a casual, too-close gesture. The contact was designed to linger long enough to be noticed and short enough to look like nothing to those who had practiced it. Her scent was citrus and something heavy that clung, a perfume that announced rather than entwined. She leaned in with a laugh that suggested inside jokes and nudged toward the hollow by his ear, the sort of move that confuses kindness for invitation. Nina watched the exchange as if through glass. The right cheekbone caught light on Claire's face. The other's shadow made Sam's handshake seem like a small declaration. For an instant, Nina allowed herself an amused tilt. Claire's audacity was almost cinematic. Women like Claire were a refined species in these rooms. Ambition in a gown, practice in their smile, a hunger translated into social currency. But amusement thinned into something sharper when Claire touched Sam's forearm, when the voice dropped from laugh to something near whispered. "Are you single?" Claire's question was casual, the kind of bluntness that expected a soft landing. Not a lunge, not a threat, just a calibration. Sam's mouth shaped a response that would have been perfect in any other universe. He could have deflected with a joke, handed the attention back at his feet, and made it harmless. He could have redirected the flirtation into a professional compliment and watched it evaporate. And maybe, if he'd been single tonight, he would have. Instead, his laugh faltered just so. He didn't reach for his hand in his pocket where a ring might have been, because for years their marriage had been a private ledger. But he moved to set a place between words and touch. He started, then stopped as if choosing the degree of answer mattered more than the answer itself. Nina felt the tiny, precise muscle in his jaw under her observation. He was doing the careful thing, courtesy without encouragement, and that courtesy was a fragile bridge when someone walked it thinking it was a runway. Claire mistook warmth for permission. It was a common mistake in their business, where charm folded into deals as easily as napkins. A man nearby chuckled, the sound small but sharp enough to roll into commentary. "Is he single?" he said, half teasing, half investigating, like someone opening a door to let gossip through. This was the moment gossip adored. People loved tidy narratives, silhouettes of scandal drawn across the high-gloss table. Someone else leaned in, a woman with a cropped haircut and a glass that trembled with interest. "He seems very available," she said. "Maybe that's why he's been popping up everywhere." Sam kept his hands on the table as if to show his palms were clear. Nina noticed the micro-gesture and catalogued it as part of a pattern. His hands moved to neutralize. They had all learned to read Sam's hands like a second language. When he placed them flat, he meant peace. When he folded them small and secretive, he was measuring a risk. When he brushed a finger against a napkin without thinking, it was a tell that he was planning something private. Claire tilted her head as if the question of his availability were a personal affront to be solved. "No ring?" she asked, and her tone wasn't cruelty. It was curiosity that needed an answer to proceed with its plan. Sam's gaze landed on Nina for a beat that felt long and private despite the lights. In that beat, a page turned. Nina could have leaned into the private exchange and said nothing. She could have let Sam answer in small syllables and watched Claire recede. There were moments when the teeth of public life demanded patience instead of spectacle, but Claire's hand, toes of fingers over Sam's sleeve, pressed a button Nina had learned to respond to years earlier. The flash of memory came without warning. They were younger, and cheaper wine had made the world look more possible than it was. A party at a friend's house that smelled of cheap perfume and accidental confessions. Sam had heard Nina say something like, "I can't. I'm tired of playing the quiet one," and he had laughed, and she had laughed too, and then they'd been on a stoop in the rain, and he had been speaking like a man who knew he might lose the only person he couldn't imagine losing. It had been impulsive, late-night oxygen, an exchange of promises that sounded like possible lies until they weren't. The paperwork had been a single signature in a quiet office, a closed door, and two people deciding to believe each other in the bare light. They'd kept that decision light in public because the world handed too many opinions freely. They kept it secret because revealing it would hand others permission to comment, to weigh in. Work, for both of them, required them to be contained. Sharing a desk could not equal sharing a bed for their colleagues. The secret was their shelter. It had worked until now. The hum of the present reasserted itself. Claire's smile had folded into a kind of calculated confusion, a deliberate misreading pretending to be spontaneous. "Well?" she asked again, owning the syllable. Sam's answer was almost surgical. "I'm seeing someone," he said, a sentence economy chosen for performance. He wrapped it in a laugh to make it sit softer, the shape of his voice designed to deflect without drama. Claire's face was for a second a map of recalibration. She blinked, as if the new information was a wrong turn she would correct. But then the old response, ambition coaxing new avenues, replaced confusion. "Someone nice?" she wanted to know. It was both a question and a strategy. Being partnered could be a detail you worked around. Nina watched Claire search a face for what she wanted and not finding it. The woman sampled the possibilities of Sam as if he were an item on a menu. That evaluation was the part that bothered Nina. Not that someone wanted Sam, but that they saw desire as clearance, as inventory. Claire moved with the assuredness of a person used to getting a yes because she had practiced the no until it bent. "Very," Sam said. He kept the word small, the tone private. It should have closed the conversation. But Claire, expecting the conversation to be an opening act, switched scripts mid-performance. "Then meet her," she said, brighter than the rest of the exchange warranted. She extended her hand toward Nina with all the theatrical charm of a showstopper. "I'm Claire. I didn't mean to interrupt. She paused, searching for a friendly tag. "I like aware men." Her hand was warm and perfumed. Her eyes flicked, calculated to Sam's reaction and back again. The move was designed to draw Nina into a scene where curiosity could be mistaken for complicity. The room leaned toward the drama because it always does. The crowd's appetite served Claire like oxygen. Nina took Claire's hand with the same lightness that had become her armor. Her grip was firm, but not dismissive. It read as a professional courtesy to an industry peer. Claire's fingers found a place on Nina's palm and lingered fractionally too long, as if testing for softness. That tested a nerve in Nina that had little patience for being assessed without permission. "Nina Wade," she said. Her voice was even. "Head of design." "Of course," Claire said, like she had always meant to know. "Your collection is—" Then she turned the compliment into an arrow. "Is this your first event together, Sam? The headlines will eat that up." Someone near them laughed outright, enjoying the possibility of headlines the way a child enjoys a rumor. People love to eat small private things whole. Sam's smile thinned. He had never liked the idea of headlines about the private parts of people he cared about. He could see, in the set of Nina's jaw and the way her cheek kept the light almost away from her eyes, that she did not share his appetite for being public property. He squeezed his fingers to make them steady. His response slid between hospitality and boundary. "We're here for the event," he said. "But it's a long night." Claire tilted her chin, picking the part of the answer she liked. "That's right," she chirped. "So maybe later, a chance to talk without the crowd?" There it was, isolation offered as the ultimate compliment. A private conversation promised to be the real prize. It was the classic trap. Remove the people, remove accountability. Nina felt that old prickly sense of exposure start to crawl up her arms. Her hand, under the table, clenched slightly into a napkin. "Excuse me," she said, a little too light and perfectly pointed. She rose, which made Claire's smile widen. So many had misread a woman standing as permission. "I'm going to greet some people on the other side." There it was, the small, honorable exit that insisted on dignity. Nina's movement suggested that she was the woman who preferred to neutralize things before they could metastasize. Claire's face, for a sliver of a second, showed the brass of a woman imagining a route around a closed door. But Nina did not walk away. She stayed, because sometimes presence is the truest kind of boundary. She folded back into her chair with a different posture now, shoulders squared, eyes direct. The room tilted a fraction. People responded to people who claimed space. "So," Claire said, and her tone changed as if the audience had shifted in her favor. "Tell me what you do, Nina, besides sitting next to a famous investor." Nina's smile was small and careful. "I design the clothes you're wearing in your head," she said, which was a private joke to Sam and a nonchalant line to Claire. There was no electricity in it, no invitation. But Claire continued, undaunted. "Really," Claire said, leaning forward with the kind of interest that only ever asks follow-ups when it thinks the answer leads to a door. "You and Sam, do you often come together to these things? You two look very together. The word landed like a probe. It suggested all kinds of things: association, romance, partnership. Nina's face smoothed into a mask of neutral charm. Sam's fingers tapped the rim of his glass. Everyone's eyes somewhere in the room had morphed into question marks. Flashback again. A dorm room, the rustle of late-night deadlines, a fight that had been a bruise and also a map. Sam had left for months once, the kind of departure that felt like a fracture. He'd come back with apologies worn soft and a stubbornness that refused to be public until both of them had agreed they meant it. They had swapped secrets to make a private pact. No press, no parade. They'd promised that if it broke, they'd break it cleanly, but otherwise they'd live a private fidelity that didn't need to be explained. Love for both of them had always been an accumulation of small acts. A cup of coffee at dawn, a shrug to fend off a rumor. Memories slid away as if the present had a vacuum cleaner for intimacy. Claire's fingers found Sam's forearm again, this time to steady a laugh he hadn't meant to give. The movement was deliberate. It was a plan to mark him. Nina decided in a thin, precise instant that she had to be louder than the room's appetite for a story. Not vindictive, not cruel, clear, precise, dignified. But before she could do the thing she had rehearsed in 1,000 private scenarios, someone else spoke. Faye, who had been chatting 2 tables away, and who still carried the sort of grin that suggested she was the town's unofficial archivist, leaned in with both elbows on the table. Faye had been a classmate once, a friend who kept receipts of history in the way people do who can be trouble at weddings. "Hey Sam," she called, the tone both teasing and calibrated. "You've been skipping our alumni dinners. What's the deal? Are you a newly minted celebrity or a lost love?" Her voice threaded through the room like a handclap. People laughed. Faye's eyes flicked to Nina with a smile that danced on that hazy border between affection and curiosity. "Who is your date, by the way?" she asked, loud enough that Claire could hear without effort. Claire's smile sharpened as if Faye had supplied the detail she needed. Sam shrugged in a way that said he didn't want to feed the machine, but Faye kept talking, a machine itself for gossip. "You two look cute," she said. "Very mysterious. Is there a story? Are we missing a romance?" Nina felt all of it like a current, amusement, irritation, a protective flare. She slid a hand to the base of her glass and found the stem steady. Sam's eyes sought hers, an invisible message threading. "I will take the heat." She read him like a map. He would be careful. He would not make a spectacle. He would trust her. But Claire had learned to skip trust. She had learned to manufacture openings. "There's such a thing as mystery, too," she purred. "It's delicious. But sometimes delicious things require a toast, not an investigative committee." There was a ripple of laughter, some genuine, some mercenary. A few people reached for their phones to discreetly take in the moment and translate it into tomorrow's coffee line gossip. The tension tightened. Sam gave a little smile, the kind that had softened 1,000 corporate tempests. "We were just discussing the latest line," he said, and meant it. "Nina has opinions, strong ones, about the color palette." Nina let the joke land where it could. It was the right move socially. But Claire, who had practiced persistence like a craft, pressed on with an intensity that had nothing to do with clothes. "Lucky man," she murmured enough for the table to carry it. "Lucky guy with a designer on speed dial." Behind the lines of banter, the room was a court. Testimony, witnesses, an audience hungry for a verdict. Claire's approach had turned the table into a stage and the neighbors into spectators. Nina saw the way a couple of cameras at a nearby bar's entrance tilted as if to eavesdrop. It was in that pressure, the crowd leaning into scandal, that Nina felt her humor evaporate. She had always been the kind of woman who kept her temper like a wardrobe, folded, pressed, rarely on display. But there was a certain line everyone seemed to assume they had permission to cross, especially in a business where the currency of narrative could be weaponized into headlines. She straightened her back and let the mild expression she favored harden into something crisp. "Claire, nice to meet you," she said, and then, because for both their sakes she believed clarity was courtesy, she added, "Sam is my husband." The words left her mouth and the room swallowed them as if they'd been a pebble dropped into still water. There was no hiss of surprise so much as a rearrangement. People tilted their heads to match the new skyline. Sam's laughter thinned entirely, turning from protective balm to an honest, startled pleasure that was like sunlight slicing through a cloud. Claire's face, for an instant, was a lesson in recalibration. She blinked, the motion a private thing trying to be public. "Oh," she said, a single syllable that carried 1,000 ways to handle error. It might have been apology, it might have been recalculated ambition, it might even have been refusal to accept a truth that conflicted with a plan. "Sorry," Claire added, too quick, too plastic. "I didn't—" There was the conversational tumble of a woman losing a script mid-performance, her hand half lifted from his forearm like an actor correcting a misstep. The room murmured in a new key. A man at the next table sucked air through his teeth in a sound that could have meant 1,000 editorial headlines. Cameras that had been idle angled nearer, not quite discreet. Phones glittered like small constellations in low light. Sam's expression softened when he looked at Nina again, and that softness was what made Nina's heart fold like paper. He had meant to protect, to be careful, to manage optics. But now he simply looked at her. No pretense, no shielding. "This is Nina," he said, measured and public, the syllables deliberate. "My wife." The words were a small, precise protection. They were also a necessary correction. People needed a frame for the photograph their gossip would later craft. He had given them one. He had set a border where Claire had tried to find a seam. Claire took a breath as if to salvage something. "Of course," she said. She smiled with the kind of grace women learn to wield as if it were polish, an attempt to restore the shine. "Congratulations." But the way she set the word down had a half-step of misread left in it, a small jewelry store pause that suggested she didn't entirely relinquish the moment's possibility. She still had the hunger of someone used to options, and she had not yet been taught that some doors close for good. Around them, the room reformatted itself to accommodate the new fact. People adjusted chairs, sipped drinks, leaned into side conversations that would become the scaffolding for tomorrow's gossip. Faye clapped her hand in a private laugh and started a new rumor with the speed of a woman who loved a plot twist. Someone asked, half joking, "When did this happen?" As if timelines soothed scandal. Nina let the atmosphere settle like dust. She felt a tremor in her palms and shoved it down. Sam's fingers curled around the stem of his glass, hesitant, a small island of steadiness. Claire's shoulders rose in that exact fraction it takes for someone to smile outwardly while the inside is recalculating. "Nice to meet you properly," Nina said. The voice was firm and friendly in the same measure. She meant to be dignified and ended up being sharper than she'd intended. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, Claire." Claire's nod suggested she had plans that didn't yet include public humility. "You too," she said. But the tone was more promise than closure. For a heartbeat after Claire moved away, retreating to the orbit of other men and other possibilities, the room bristled with commentary. Nina could hear fragments. "Did you see that? That's awkward. I'd never. It would die, all of it." Gossip had a short life when it wasn't fed, and people are fickle in the daytime light. But Claire's approach had cracked a deposit of unease Nina had been keeping balled up for months. The unease of living privately in a world that loved public narratives. It would require tending. Sam reached across the table just this once and laid his fingers very lightly on the back of Nina's hand. It was a small touch intended for no one else, a steadying wire. Nina let her fingers rest under his. The warmth was enough, an anchor in the immediate storm. "Thank you," he said quietly, enough that only she could hear. His voice had a little tremor to it, not from guilt, but from the reminder of how quickly the world could misread a kind thing. "For that." She squeezed his fingers in return, the way you squeeze to confirm presence and solidarity. "You should be harder to seduce," she murmured, which was both husband-teasing and gentle rebuke. There was a playfulness in it, an opening for the kind of courtship they'd promised each other in small stations across their relationship. Recourting, she thought. There is always time to court again. He smiled, the kind that slid into private jokes and the memory of weekend breakfasts. "I prefer a challenge," he said. But the moment didn't resolve there, because while public statements could be made, private logistics rearranged themselves like furniture in the dock. There were people to reassure, apologies to offer if Claire sought them, and the aftermath of being the center of an uncomfortable story. And in Nina's chest, something else moved, a desire not only for protection but for recognition. If their marriage had been kept small, perhaps it had also done the little violence of invisibility. Tonight, standing in the spill of glittering light, she could feel the tension between staying small and being seen. "Let's go," she said instead, rising with a casualness that was a mask. "We should catch up with the group." They moved through the room the way a small boat cuts through a crowded river, leaving a ripple but holding steady. People watched them, curious about the ship they composed, about whether it had a map. Faye waved as if she had not been the one to needle, for Faye's curiosity lived in contradictions. Hans, who'd been speaking with a corner of the board, glanced over with something like calculating interest, but that was just the business of people who kept records of moments. Outside, the air bid in a way the lobby did not. A valet moved with practiced efficiency. The night was still young. The event's playlist had not yet turned sultry. Claire lingered near the doorway, a red ribbon around the possibility she'd misread. Nina exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding until it left. She had played the scene she preferred, calm, precise, not loud. The crowd had its story. Sam had made the correction. Claire had either learned or filed away a humiliation for later use. None of it had been violent. No one had been shamed in the real sense. But Nina felt the heat of eyes on her like a low fever. They walked to the car in a bubble of steps shared. It was quiet between them until Sam's voice, soft and low enough to be for her only, broke the silence. "You handled that well." She leaned her head back against the leather of the seat and let the city lights smear across the ceiling like a watercolor. "You didn't need me," she said, but the words were rhetorical. She knew he hadn't needed her. Even so, they had each other's back because they'd always had to. "I didn't," he admitted. "You did. Thank you." She turned to him then, full attention, and for a moment the public heat melted into something private and warm. "Maybe it's time you let me be your suitor again," she teased. The line was meant to diffuse and to promise favor. It was the kind of banter that stitched them together. Sam's laugh in the dark of the car was an answering note. "I'll consider it," he said. "But maybe later. I handled the Claire problem." Nina raised an eyebrow. "You handled it with a laugh and an ambiguous phrase," she said. "Is that your version of protection?" He reached for her hand in the dark and held it the way he always did, and it felt like coming home. "My version changes based on who I'm protecting," he said. "Tonight I wanted to keep it small." She considered that, and then let a smile slide, slow and private. "Sometimes small isn't enough," she said. Sam turned his head to look at her, his expression soft. "Then tell me what's enough." Nina didn't answer right away. Her mind ran through a checklist that wasn't just practical. Narratives to control, people to call, the way Claire's eyes had catalogued them both. There were minor damage control moves, and then there was the larger question of how visible they wanted to be. The secret had been a shelter, yes, but shelters sometimes became prisons of silence. She thought about the ring she kept tucked away in a small velvet box in a drawer at home. She thought about the promise they'd made, tender, private, made in a small office under fluorescent light, and how true it still felt when he touched her hand. And she thought about Claire, who had misread the room the way predators misread open doors, and about all the women in lipstick who use seduction like a career strategy. "Enough is being seen," she said finally. "Enough is not letting someone make a story out of us for sport." Sam's mouth pressed into a line, a map of concentration. "Then we'll make different stories," he said. They sat with that for a minute, the hum of the car awash around them. Nina felt their private spaces rearrange, like books on a shelf shifted to accommodate a larger volume. They were living in the kind of world that wanted small confessions turned into headlines. Perhaps they could be authors instead. It was an intoxicating thought, and a terrifying one all at once. They drove away into the peppered streetlights. The night was a promise of chores and small choices. As the car unfolded through the city, the shape of Claire's approach lingered like an echo. An incident with a mild tremor that would need tending if it were to stay mild. Nina pictured the list she would make, the people she'd follow up with, the polite emails she'd send to ensure reputations remained intact. She pictured the conversation she'd have with Sam tomorrow when there would be time for private things, for the sort of honesty the room does not allow. But even as plans coalesced, another thought crept under her skin, one that had less to do with strategy and more to do with a quieter wish. If being seen meant being open to the slow, deliberate courting they had once promised each other, she would accept that risk. Maybe the world could see them sometimes and not consume them whole. The car slowed at a red light, and somewhere in the back of the mind, a small private memory surfaced. A pregnancy test, a small hand at the edge of a counter, a whispered laugh in the dark. It was a thing they had considered privately, and then placed carefully away like a fragile ornament. Not yet the time to tell, Nina had decided, because the world loved newness when it could dress it in scandal. But the thought of something promising, quiet, fragile, inching toward them, felt like a warm weight against her ribs. She didn't say that aloud. She didn't have to. Sam gave her hand a small squeeze and the world compressed in a good way. They were not yet ready to sign off on an announcement, not ready to let the room turn a private miracle into a public spectacle. But the seed of possibility hummed quietly in the space between them. At the same light, Claire moved through another cluster of people and found a different type of attention. She had been deflected, yes, but where one door closes, the method practiced by people like her rarely dissipates. She smiled, recalibrated, and leaned into another conversation as if the night obliged. People like Claire collect chances like currency. Tonight she'd miscounted, and people miscount in all sorts of ways. Nina watched the city around them blur by and felt a small, steady resolve grow. If the world wanted to tell stories about them, she would make sure the story they told was their own. She would decide when, how, and to whom. She would not be used as an accessory in someone else's ambition. She would defend what was hers with the quiet ferocity of someone who loved without needing to announce the fact. The light turned green, the car rolled forward, and the rest of the city folded around them, sharp and indifferent and full of plots. They would have to pay attention. There were calls to make, people to see, and the logistics of privacy to manage. The little tremor of Claire's approach had become a notch in the timeline. It would not be the last. They drove into the night with the inside of the car lit by the dashboard like a small safe room. Outside, the event spilled into the city, stories starting like small fires that needed to be watched. Inside, Sam reached across and squeezed Nina's hand again. "We should talk tomorrow," he said, his voice low and steady. "Tomorrow," she agreed. "And maybe we can practice letting you be my suitor on purpose." He grinned in the dark, relief folding his face into something playful. "That's a promise I can try to keep." They didn't know then that the night was only the first chord of a longer song. There would be phone calls and messages, an apology, maybe, from Claire, or maybe not. There would be in-jokes, rumors, and the small consequence of having been seen. For now, at the edge of the city, with their hands clasped and their secret held like a small treasured thing, it was enough to be together. But as their car merged into the river of taillights, another figure posed under the glow of the lobby, phone in hand, fingers moving as if typing a caption. There are always witnesses, Nina thought, and sometimes witnesses become instruments. The night wasn't over, the story wasn't finished, it had only just begun to unspool. "Stay with me." There was a small, brain-quiet urge to tell anyone watching this scene from the outside. The phone in Claire's hand blinked once, twice, and then the screen filled with a small, neat filament of words. "Just met Sam Judd, charming, wonder if he's single." She hesitated for half a beat, long enough to imagine a headline, then hit post. The lobby light stained her face gold as the caption found its way into the night, curling through networks and into feeds. It landed where feeds live, quick, hungry, and already being reshaped into conversation. Across the city, someone else opened their phone because a friend had sent the photo and the little blurred video of Claire laughing with Sam, and someone else forwarded it plus a "Who is that?" caption. The image folded into 1,000 private interpretations. On a slow scroll morning, a screen caught a phrase. Someone tagged a name, a gossip column leaned in. The thing with modern rumors was that they required almost no oxygen. They proliferated by momentum alone. Nina's phone vibrated in the bowl by the front door before dawn. She blinked at the dim numbers and knew, without looking, the kinds of messages that wake a private life early. Half jokes, a screenshot, the thread of a chat. Sam was still asleep, proof of a man who could still steal extra minutes despite the world they lived in. But she picked up the device because some things deserved being seen on your own timetable. They were less vicious than she'd feared. A few friends sending hearts, a supportive colleague checking in, Faye's message with 3 laughing emojis and the words, "Gossip machine is full speed, you okay?" But there were also new things. Comments, a sideways piece on a local blog, the headline that a rival firm liked to curate, investor charm or dangerous liaison. The headline tried for scandal and landed mostly on curiosity. She read them with the same steady calm she applied to constructive criticism. Her morning ritual was a cup of coffee, a small look at the world, and then a plan. This was a ripple. It could be a wave. The shape it took would depend on how they moved. Sam finally surfaced, the way people do from deep sleep, slow eyes, a breath like a curtain pulling back. He reached for the phone she'd set beside him and scrolled, the motion private. "Already trending?" he asked without surprise. "Small tide," she said. "Nothing that needs 3 lawyers." She let a small smile ease the edge of the sentence. The thing was, both of them were practiced in minimizing what could be minimized. They'd made a rule early on, measure everything twice before you let it into the room. He sat up, hair mussed, the evening's jacket abandoned over a chair like a thing that had been used and set down. "I did what I should have," he said, the words measured to be both apology and acclaim. "I introduced you." "You did, nicely." There was affection in the sentence. There was also the quiet assertion of a woman who had watched people assume and reach and misread. "But if it gets bigger, we're going to need a small, boring narrative. A little truth card that's accurate and not salacious." He nodded. "We tell our story on our terms. I can manage that." He smiled at her with the private grin he used for her, and no one else. "And I owe Claire a call, if only to be civil." "Do it when I'm in the room," she said. "I don't need you to offer explanations without me, and I don't need her apologies to be the thing that ends up on a page alone." He laughed low. "Always practical." And that was their rhythm. A practical thought, a private laugh, the work of setting walls that were neither theatrical nor brittle. The morning had tasks. Nina sent a note to PR, a small factual line about the night's collaboration on the sponsorship tables and a request for distance from speculation. Sam had a meeting with a board member mid-morning who wanted reassurance that his newfound visibility wouldn't unsettle investors. Nina scheduled a design review to keep her calendar anchored in work that mattered. They performed the practical choreography of people used to keeping private promises and public responsibilities in separate lanes. At the office, the atmosphere was a layered thing. Work first, curiosity second. The hum of side conversations low and constant. People were careful with their eyes. Everyone wanted to be closer to the gossip without seeming hungry. Faye lingered near the coffee machine with the sort of smile that said she had a file on them, but also, if it came down to it, loyalty. "You okay?" Faye asked as Nina refilled her mug. There was an angle in the way she framed questions, gossipy but not unkind. Faye had always been that. A woman who loved stories but held a certain affection for the people who starred in them. Nina took the question like a fabric to sample. "Fine," she said. "We handled it?" "Handled it? What's that mean in Faye translation?" "It means Sam corrected the record," Nina said. "Claire misread, we set it straight, end of story." Faye looked at her as if evaluating the truth of a confession. "Did you see her post? She made it sound more like a conquest. Ugh, I wanted to throttle a phrase." "Then you should have throttled Claire," Nina said wry. "But the world is not a pillow. It doesn't cushion much." Faye laughed. "You always have the best metaphors." She lowered her voice. "Do you want me to shut anyone down? I can—" "Don't." Nina's answer was immediate and surprising even to Faye. "Not unless necessary. Gossip dies when you stop watering it." She met Faye's eyes in a way that was both practical and slightly private. "But if anyone starts spinning the wrong kind of story, tell me. We handle it together." Faye nodded, not surprised. "You two are weirdly coordinated," she said, with the fondness of someone who had watched something grow from oddness into a stable thing. Then Faye's expression shifted into something else, curiosity that softened. "By the way, are you still keeping the idea of being private, or are you Going to tell people, because if you tell, I will throw confetti. Nina considered, the question settling like a pebble into still water. There was a temptation in being seen, a hunger she hadn't allowed herself to show. There was also the safety of the old agreement. We'll talk about it, she said, but not today. Today we design the line. For the rest of the day, work kept its own gravity. Nina walked the studio, adjusting sketches, advising on fabric weights, making small editorial decisions that shaped the way garments would fall on real bodies. Each instruction was a miniature act of control, the kind of discipline she cherished. Sam showed up in the afternoon to sit in on a supply chain meeting that required both investor perspective and an understanding that fabric comes with practical drama. He listened, unused to the minutiae but keen on the patterns. In the late afternoon, Claire texted Sam. The message read, "I'm sorry for last night. I was presumptuous. I didn't know. Can we talk?" Sam read it twice and then put the phone down. He told Nina about it more than he told her the call. He told her because he sensed she'd want to know first and to set the terms. "Do you want me to have that conversation?" Nina asked. He shrugged. "I can, but maybe it's better if you steer it. She's someone in our industry. It's better if you set the boundary and be the decider of how public you want to be about your life." Nina thought of Claire, sharp, vivid, possibly lonely in ways she didn't show, and then thought of the way women in their scene often read other women as immediate competition. She recognized the pattern. She didn't have to like it. "Okay," she said. "I'll meet her for coffee. I'm not in the mood for theater." The cafe they chose was neutral, a small place equidistant between the hotel where Claire often lodged and Nina's studio. It had a noise that blurred details into warmth and the sort of midday light that made conversational armor less necessary. Claire was already there when Nina arrived, red lipstick subtly faded, hair pulled into an efficient knot, a nervy smile that tried for composure and didn't quite get there. "Thanks for meeting me," Claire said before Nina even sat. Her voice had a thread of apology that wasn't all performance. "I agreed," Nina said. "What's the objective?" Claire's laugh was tiny. "No objective other than not wanting to be a jerk. I misread. I thought—" She stopped and then began again, halting. "I thought you were a date. I sometimes, this is going to sound awful, use a little forwardness as a shortcut. It works a lot of the time. I forgot logic exists." Nina listened. She didn't enjoy being flattered by a woman who'd tried to seduce her husband, but she didn't need to look like it. "So this is about you, not about me," she said. "Mostly," Claire admitted. "I suppose it's about me wanting something, attention, a connection, a validation, and mistaking warmth for permission. And that was rude." "Rude is the word," Nina said simply. "You misread because you didn't ask. You assumed. That assumption could have been small or it could have been cruel. You were lucky it was small, but don't mistake me being willing to speak to you for weakness." Claire's shoulders tightened. "I never meant to make you feel any—" She swallowed. "Look, I read your career. I respect what you do. I make a lot of moves with people in my line of work, and sometimes you make moves in a way that treats people like objectives," Nina finished for her. "It wasn't cruel, it was clear. That's your method. It doesn't have to be the only one. And if you're looking for advice, here's some. Stop assuming kindness is an invitation. It's not always a gateway." Claire looked down, hands around a coffee cup. For the first time since the night at the gala, she looked small and candid instead of practiced and polished. "You're right," she said, "and I'm sorry. I was rude and I should have checked myself." "Apology accepted," Nina said. "But we should set expectations. This is a professional world. We have to act professionally around each other. If you want something, from Sam or otherwise, you ask and you accept the answer." "Yes," Claire said. "Understood?" Nina hesitated, then asked the question she wanted answered more than protocol. Why did you go for it? Was it just habit, or is there another reason?" Claire's face shifted. "I'm newly out of a long-term thing," she said quietly, a confession that sounded almost dangerous in its intimacy. "I work a lot. Sometimes I mistake availability for possibility, and I thought, well, Sam has profile, sure, but honestly, I wanted to be seen. I wanted someone to look at me and see me as more than the person who writes investor checks." There was truth there, not an excuse, but context. Nina nodded. She didn't need to forgive Claire's tactics, but she could accept her motives without being soft about consequences. People don't exist alone. Ambition is sometimes a hunger born of emptiness. We're not objects, Nina said. We are people. If you want to be seen, do it without making others invisible. Claire's eyes shimmered with something like recognition. I'll do better, she promised. Nina left the cafe with a paper cup as a prop and a memory of Claire's honesty that didn't erase the previous night but softened the edges. She told Sam about the meeting in the car on the way back, and he listened like someone who liked to take notes on the world around them. Thanks, he said simply. I'm glad you went. Me too, she said. It was less dramatic than I worried. Back at the studio, the day slipped into a rhythm. The little rumors that had been sparked cooled as the week unfolded. People have short attention spans when there's a new seasonal show to discuss or a product relaunch to dissect. Still, the incident lodged like a small pebble you feel under your shoe, an irritation that reminded them to pay attention. One evening, as the sky was turning purple and the last of the design team were packing up, Sam sat across from Nina at her drafting table, a stack of fabric swatches between them that felt like an island of normalcy. He picked up a swatch, ran a thumb along its grain, and then set it down. I was thinking, he said. She looked up, the light catching the slope of her cheek. Dangerous. Maybe, he smiled. But good dangerous. We keep talking about being private because it's safe. But maybe safe has become a synonym for invisible. You said you wanted to be seen, on our terms. What would that look like to you? Nina considered the question like a designer picks a color. Practical first, emotional after. It means we decide the narrative, she said. We choose who hears our news and when. It means we don't let people make spectacle of our choices. It also means choosing to be public sometimes, if it serves us, and being honest with each other about why we choose either way. Sam leaned forward, elbows on the table. Are you asking for a plan or testing me? A little of both. She folded a swatch into a near-perfect edge, the motion betraying the way focus calms her. I want us to be a team about it, not two separate people trying to protect different things. Team, he echoed. He reached for her hand across the table, the touch familiar as rhythm. Okay, team. And, she added after a beat, I don't want to be the only one protecting us. You won't be, he said, and the promise carried an echo of the night when he'd introduced her, public and private in twin syllables. They built a plan that night that was less about announcements and more about shared standards. They set small rules, how to respond to intrusive questions, who would be the first call for family news, and when to tell colleagues about personal shifts. It sounded bureaucratic, but it felt like armor that would let them be seen without being consumed. In those planning hours, in the soft lamplight, something else occurred to Nina, an impulse she'd folded away for months. She reached into her bag and pulled out the small velvet box she'd kept hidden under a drawer in the studio since the day they'd signed the paperwork in a quiet office years before. She'd chosen it for no audience, a quiet commitment wrapped in a place people rarely opened. Sam's eyes lifted when he saw the box. He didn't speak. His expression was a question mark softened by warmth. Nina opened it and took out the small band they'd slid onto each other's hands in a single-moment decision. She'd kept it tucked away by choice, a private token they wore for their private life. But tonight she set it on the table between them, a small physical symbol of what they had promised in the quiet. I've been thinking, she said. We keep this small because that's how we've wanted it, but maybe the keeping doesn't serve us anymore. Maybe it's time to let some things out, slowly, on our terms. Sam touched the band with reverence, like someone who keeps a fragile thing. What are you saying, Nina? She inhaled. I'm saying I want us to make some choices visible. Not everything, not for the headlines, but enough so that if someone like Claire crosses boundaries again, the world will already know. I want to be recognized, not as an accessory, but as someone with her own name and her own terms. He listened the way he always did, attentive, curious, protective. If you want to tell people, we'll tell them, he said. If you want us to be seen, I'll make sure you are. I'll be your loudest private ally. She smiled at the image. And you'll still keep that dry sense of humor. I can't promise otherwise, he said. They talked until the stars got lazy and the city outside the studio windows cooled. Their plan was not a manifesto. It was a list of small acts that would accumulate into a narrative. They would tell a few people at first, parents, close friends, and key industry allies. They would not make a spectacle. They would craft a statement for the press if necessary. Mostly they wanted to create a context where the truth of their relationship existed on terms they wrote. And then, in the middle of their late-night meeting that was equal parts strategy and domesticity, Nina did something she hadn't planned. She took a breath and reached for him across the table, her hand covering his. He looked up, puzzled and tender. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything," he said immediately. "Promise you'll be my suitor again, not because the world needs it, but because I do." Sam laughed, the sound small and earnest. "I promise. I will bring you flowers with aggressive intention, write terrible poetry, and pretend I didn't buy the whole plant at the florist because it looked like you'd like it." She rolled her eyes and laughed back. "Deal." They slept that night with plans tucked like letters under their pillows. The next morning Nina woke up with a small private flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with anxiety and everything to do with possibility. It was a reminder of a life not yet lived, a question that hadn't been answered. She paced the studio late that afternoon, hands on the drafting table, when a design assistant interrupted with the smallest knock. "There's someone here to see you," the assistant said. She left a note. Claire said she wanted to apologize again and to offer to help with outreach in the future. She says she knows how to navigate media. Nina considered, then nodded. She had no interest in public revenge. If Claire wanted to offer help, perhaps to repair a professional relationship, she could be pragmatic. "Have her come up," she said. Claire arrived with a hesitant smile and a small folded card. She handed it to Nina like a conciliatory coin. "I wrote some draft notes for damage control," she said. "If you want, you can take it. I'm not pushing myself into your life. I just wanted to be useful." Nina took the paper, read it briefly, then set it down. It was sensible. A few bullet points about messaging and tone, workable. She looked at Claire and saw less satin and more human weariness. "You can help," she said, "but on professional terms. You are not a problem to be solved by PR. You are a colleague." "And friends?" Claire ventured, hopeful. Nina studied her, then allowed the smallest of nods. "Maybe," she said. "But first, let's keep it professional." Claire's relief was visible, raw and grateful in equal measure. "Thank you," she said. "I mean it. Thank you." Outside, the city hummed on. Inside, they made a modest plan for collaboration that kept boundaries intact. It was, in a small way, a victory. People adapt when they are treated like adults. In the weeks that followed, the rumor faded like dew. People moved on to fresher stories. The studio launched a seasonal collection with Nina's fingerprints all over it. Sam continued to be visible at a few key industry events, and he began to introduce Nina deliberately, the way someone might introduce a partner whose accomplishments they wanted emphasized, not as a novelty, but as a collaborator in their own right. The carefully built context did what they'd hoped. It made future intrusions less plausible because the story that might have attached to them had been partly told on their own terms. But there was an undercurrent the two of them had not yet named, a possibility they'd toyed with privately. The thought had come once in the car on that first night, then in the quiet of the studio, like a whisper that might be important. They had both thought of it and tucked it away because it felt tender and fragile. Now, however, it hummed with a different urgency, less secrecy, more readiness. One Sunday morning, the city still sleeping, Nina felt it again like a small pulse, a physical knowing that answered no one but her. She set a cup of coffee down and went to the medicine cabinet with hands that already felt slightly unsteady in excitement. She found the small white box she'd bought months ago and then lost to practicality. Her breath quickened. She knew this was a moment she would choose to keep or to share. She stepped back to the living room where Sam was making tea, the light washing the room in a soft gold. "Come here," she said, voice tight in a way that demanded attention. He turned, a question in his eyes. "Everything okay?" "Maybe better than okay," she said. She handed him the box without explanation. He blinked, the gears turning. He looked at her for the permission she hadn't yet spoken. She nodded. He set down the cup, hands steady though his heart had picked up speed. They were both careful with this kind of thing. tenderness recognized as a dangerous, beautiful instrument. She held the small stick like an offering, and then used his hand as if to steady. Minutes stretched like awnings. The clock on the wall ticked soundlessly. When she looked down again, the 2 tiny lines were unmistakable. She laughed and then sobbed in a single breath, the sound raw and bright. "Oh," Sam said, voice a mosaic of astonishment and tenderness. He reached across and wrapped his arms around her like someone sealing a promise. "Oh." There was a moment of silence that contained everything. Joy, disbelief, the sudden pressure of the world outside, and the intimate flash of memory that had once felt like a possible future but had been tucked away because they weren't ready for its weight. They let themselves be small and private and enormous in that embrace. They sat on the couch where the sunlight made fractions of gold on the floor and talked in whispers. The conversation made of practical firsts and poetic always. They considered doctors, timing, how to tell their parents without inviting too much spectacle. They laughed until they cried, and then cried until they could laugh again. Nina told Sam about the small private idea she'd once imagined, and how she had kept it like a fragile ornament. Sam kissed the corner of her mouth and promised to be the loudest private ally and the gentlest public one. They were still committed to controlling their narrative. They were also ready to fold this new life into the architecture of their choices. Word of the pregnancy would be theirs to give, when and how they wanted. They would tell family first, then close friends, and then perhaps a short, purposeful statement for the studio and the industry. They would not let the narrative be constructed by the curious. They had learned too much to be passive. "Will you do me a favor?" Nina asked through a soft laugh, the kind of request a couple keeps for moments when they want to make things ceremonious. "Anything less dramatic than a full orchestra?" Sam replied. "Just one small thing." She tilted her head. "When the baby comes, I want you to court me like you mean it, not because anyone is watching, but because I want the habit." He smiled, a smile that meant he would willingly transform into a suitor for as long as she asked. "I promise," he said. "And I'll start now. I'll write terrible poetry and buy a potted plant that I will accidentally kill but intend lovingly." They both laughed. The laughter settled the room in a way that conversation alone couldn't. Over the next few weeks, they navigated the logistics with the same mix of humor and practicality that shaped their days. They told their parents in a small dinner that felt like a private triumph. Faye brought cupcakes and cried a little more than necessary. Hans, with his calendar always looking for an advantage, sent a congratulatory message that sounded courteous and a little calculating. Claire sent flowers and a note that read simply, "I am happy for you." At the studio, Nina took a small maternity leave plan and revised deadlines so the team could adapt. Sam shifted his public appearances to be a steady presence but not a spectacle. They told the employees with a short, warm gathering, no fanfare, only the quiet joy of people who trusted one another. For them, the incident at the gala that had once threatened to be a story became, in a funny, private way, a catalyzing moment. It had forced them to examine the terms of their visibility and to decide what they would allow the world to know. It had led to a choice, not the spectacle of publicity, but the daily decision to protect and to celebrate the tender things between them. Months later, after a small, intimate celebration at home with close family and a controlled, tasteful statement to the press that they had prepared together, their life shifted new and delicate. Nina sometimes caught herself smiling at the hush of a nursery plan. Sam would practice lullabies he didn't fully understand and trip over soft blankets in the happiest way. And the world watched in its distracted way. Some people congratulated, others clicked for content. And those whose business was gossip found their attention scattered among 1,000 other possible infidelities and alliances. Theirs had become a story that they mostly stewarded themselves, small, dignified and human. On a sleepy Sunday morning, after the first round of visitors had left and soft lights played across the apartment, Sam and Nina sat at their kitchen table with 2 mugs of tea and a baby name book open between them. The morning moved with a domestic sanctity that was almost holy in its ordinariness. "You are not the kind of man to cry at infant names," Nina said, a teasing note in her voice as she traced a pencil lightly down a list of possibilities. He feigned offense. "I'll have you know I cried at a puppy name once." She laughed. "I remember." He reached across and took her hand. There was a small ring she kept hidden, not because they were ashamed, but because they had chosen a private cadence. He thumbed the band as if remembering a map. "We did good," he said quietly. She squeezed his hand back. "We did." He rose suddenly, the way people do when they have half a plan and whole intentions. He disappeared into a bedroom and returned with something small in his hands, a folded postcard he'd written in a shaky, earnest hand. It was not a public proposal. It was one of those private, ceremonious things he did for her. Not flashy, but deliberate. He read it aloud, his voice low and a little ridiculous, and she laughed through tears, the sound something like a chime. The card said things that were both ridiculous and true. Promises to court her every Wednesday, vows to make terrible coffee and better breakfasts, pledges to protect the small things and to be seen beside her when the world asked for a photograph. "More coffee commitments than anything," she observed, smiling. "I love you." "I love you too," he said. The moment was not a crescendo, it was a settling. Their life had been tested by a moment of misread signals, by the hunger of other people and the way the industry sometimes mistook friendliness for access. They had navigated it with clarity. They had corrected the record, set boundaries, extended civility where it was due, and reinforced their private commitment with the tenderness of shared decisions. They had allowed the possibility of a new life between them and decided together how they would let the world know. The final note that bridged them to ordinary life was small and domestic, a morning kiss, a promise to be one another's suitor, and the private knowledge that despite the world's appetite for stories, the most important story about them would always be the one they told each other, softly, stubbornly, and with a lot of terrible poetry. If you stayed with Sam and Nina through the whole thing, thanks for watching their small human mess and their quieter victories. If you liked this story, consider liking the video, leaving a comment about which character surprised you most, and subscribing for more stories where love and work collide in messy, honest ways.